What's going on, everybody? Tonight I have another guest, and Joe, I don't think we know each other from Adam, do we?
No.
When you really get down to it, we met over the phone.
We got mutual friends, and of course, I'm kind of. The more you look into it, I'm a little infamous sometimes. It depends on who you talk to. I'm sure you've talked to people who know who I am. So
Probably so.
Yeah.
So the reason we got Joel on, and by the way, we're talking with Joel Stewart this evening. As many of you have done, Joel sent a message into the podcast one day, and next thing I know, I started talking with him and realized that Joel had quite the backstory. And honestly, I think we could probably get several episodes out of all the things that we just lightly touched on that night, Joel. Why don't you go ahead and give everybody maybe a little bit of the background as far as your connection with the CHM, and maybe they can relate a little bit to you then.
Well, I kind of grew up in the conservative. Well, actually, not kind of, but I actually do. I grew up in the conservative holiness movement. Went to an independent conservative holiness church, so they were not associated with any of the denominations, which is kind of unique. There's a few of them out there, but they associate with a lot of the different schools and everything like that. But as far as the denominations,
that's not something that the CHM's usually real big on, right? I think the Baptists are pretty hardcore. They like the independent thing, but the CHM churches usually they join in a group.
Well, exactly, and I think that's kind of led to some kind of recent attacks on my local conservative holiness church. The church that I grew up in. So they've kind of been ostracized because of that. So there's it is what it is. But I feel bad for them, because they did not associate with some of the greater, holiness movements. And so there's been a few attacks. And when I went to God's Bible School, I heard a lot of rumors about my church. A lot of people did not like the church that I grew up in, just because they considered that being kind of rebellious.
Really?
Because that was looked upon as being rebellious, because they did not submit to a greater holiness congregation, or that kind of thing. So I guess and I was always called a rebel. I guess I kind of grew up in it. I learned it from somewhere,
Right. Right.
So so I kind of grew up. My dad's side of the family was conservative holiness. My mom's side of the family grew up kind of Southern Baptist. So, but my mom's side of the family, my mom was a hairdresser. So I grew up in both worlds, and I was always kind of torn between the two. So I saw both sides all the time.
So your mom was a hairdresser while attending the CHM church?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I grew up with that. Yeah, so I was, I was stuck right in the middle of that. My dad continued going to the church because that's where all his family was.
Right.
And we went where his family was. So yeah, I was stuck in the middle of that, and I went to the Bible school for a while, and that was tough. I'd have teachers sit down with me, and bring up what is it, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. I think it's second.
Oh, yeah.
I get it mixed up whether it's first or second, but a woman should not cut her hair, and they'd sit there, and I'm like 14 years old.
Oh boy.
And they're like grilling me on this, how much of a sin this is. Listen, I'm 14 years old, and you're telling me this about my own mother? And yet I'm supposed to be a child, respecting my parents and honoring my father and mother. And then you're trying to tell me not to honor my father and mother because my mother's a hairdresser. It's so much conflicting information coming from spiritual leaders. I don't even know which way is up, which way is down. And I'm a teenager. you automatically, as a teenager, don't know which way is up or down. You
Oh
know?
yeah. Yeah, I
You're,
remember
you're
the days.
looking for guidance at that age. You know. So I mean, I'm just turmoil after turmoil. But that wasn't the beginning. I mentioned to you before, as early as the age of 5, I was thrown into this spiritual battle, and it was something that was, the more the way I think about it now as I'm older, it's surreal. Because it's like, how on earth, it's like you're seeing things that nobody else really ever sees.
Mm.
So to kind of go back to that, my parents ended up purchasing this house. It was kind of like an old, like barn style house. The rumor was the house was supposed to be a barn, and then they ended up turning it into a house. So that's the shape that it was.
I see. What state are we? What state are we in here, Joel? Talking about this?
I'm in southern Michigan.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, southern Michigan, and so they purchased this house, and it was really inexpensive. I mean, they were shocked at how cheap it was. They didn't understand why it was so.
Oh no.
Yeah, I remember my parents saying, "Man, this is a really good deal."
Oh no.
And yeah, they didn't understand why.
Yeah.
And they get this house, and I'm like, I don't know, 1 years old, because they were living in a house trailer prior to that. And so they move in, and as I get older, they started noticing weird things happening in this house. And so, like they would see like shadowy figures from behind the couch where the couch was pop up, and the best way to describe it, because I remember these. I was 5 years old when I was there, but like I remember seeing it myself. You ever see the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze?
Yes, I have. It's been a long time ago,
Okay,
but I
you
have.
see, you see that portion where the demons come and take that bad guy,
Oh yeah.
like basically like drag him to hell.
Yep.
Those demons are so accurate. Of course, it's 1980s, so it's not like spot on. But that is probably the most accurate representation of demons I've ever seen, than actual seeing it myself.
Really?
That right there is, I can't watch the movie because it's so. That's what I saw.
Now, when you said you were seeing this, was the whole family seeing this, or just you at this point?
Oh, I was not the only one. No, So if it was just me, I would have said, okay, so it's sleep paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was in my 20s, I went into this agnostic atheist period. Because I grew up in the CHM. Everybody
Right.
who like leaves the CHM and wants to walk away, they go through that period where they got to question everything.
A lot of
And
people
if you
do.
don't, then you probably never really come back. It's like you got to have that questioning period where you really look at scripture and examine it and try to find the facts and the truth.
Right.
So when I was going through that, I was like, oh no, that was just sleep paralysis as a kid. And then I was like, well, wait a minute. Why on earth would my parents see the same thing I'm seeing? Why would they have the exact same, why would they have the same experiences? That wouldn't make sense.
So once you all moved into this house, how long after you moved? Because you said you were 1 when you moved in, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long after you guys moved in did your parents start noticing this stuff? Was it immediate, or did it take a little while?
From what I know of the story, and I'd have to talk to my mom again, but I'm pretty sure it was immediate, but it just kept getting worse. It kept getting worse, because we were, at the time, I didn't know this when I was younger, but my dad was going through some real spiritual struggles. So my dad was a biker, but he grew up conservative holiness too. This is, I mean, the family tradition in the conservative holiness movement goes back couple generations.
I see.
So my great grandparents were in it. So he grew up in this. He went to the Bible school of my church, and he went through all of that. Had all of the battles over short sleeves, jewelry, all of that stuff. Everything that everybody in the conservative holiness movement has gone through. Those are the struggles.
Yeah, he'd been there.
My dad always said my dad had a terrible fear of needles, even though he was a biker. Usually bikers get tattoos.
Yep.
He was terrified of needles, so he never got tattoos. But he said, if I could ever get over that fear of needles, I get nipples tattooed on my elbows, just so I could have a reason to wear those long sleeves. That was always his joke, because he never understood why on earth are elbows considered sexy. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that was always his thing.
I like it.
I almost thought about just getting it done just in honor of him and that kind of thing. I thought about that. I could never wear short sleeves.
I would love to be there for that conversation with the tattoo artist.
It's like, why on earth you get? Well, you know what? There actually are tattoo artists out there who practice making lifelike nipples for women who have had breast removal. So that's a real thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's because I can't imagine what that's like, having to go through that. So There's actually tattoo artists that do that. So I thought about getting some legit, real lifelike ones done, just so that they could get the practice and I could, that would be kind of funny.
That would be.
But anyway, yeah, going back to the house. So obviously when I got older, 4 or 5 years old, I'm probably recognizing more of the stuff that's happening just because of my age. I'm a little more aware. And I start noticing I'd be asleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sweating, and I'd look at the end of my bed and I'd see 7 of them standing at the end of my bed. One larger one in the middle with 3 on each side. And then again, they've got that same form as what you see in that movie Ghost. It's just a shadow, just a dark shadow with a head and shoulders.
So you couldn't make out features, nothing like that?
There was no face, no features. The only time I ever saw anything with any kind of features that I can remember was one time standing in my room, and it looked just like an Egyptian god, the one with the dog face. I think it was.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
What I'm talking about? Yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
Oh, man,
So the one that had the face of a dog. Yeah. And what's crazy about that is the pastor at the church that I attend now said that while he was praying and during a revival, this was just I don't know, a year or so ago, he saw that exact same, that Egyptian god with the dog face standing right there. And they were trying to pray through in revival. And he saw that standing there, and he just started praying even more in Jesus' name, and boom, it went away. And eventually they had revival, God came and really spoke to them, and they had some breakthroughs, some spiritual breakthroughs.
I have heard of that figure before, Joel. And it's weird that dog thing keeps coming up. I've heard there was Canaan actually was at their youth camp. They had an experience, and that was a figure that they saw there as well.
Well, and see, it doesn't, because a lot of people that attend the church that I go to now are former CHM people. And I don't know. I know, here's one thing that I'm convinced of. I'm convinced of that every single attitude, every single action that you have, there's a spiritual aspect behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm sitting there and I've got some attitude that I'm superior to you, or, that I've got some sort of enlightened idea of the Bible and it makes me better than you, which some people in the conservative holiness movement have that spirit. They
Yes.
have that attitude
Yes.
that there is a demonic spirit attached to that. There's because every single thing we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Yep.
You know, there's another side to what we're dealing with. That other side, I think, is the bigger battle here that a lot of us never see. But I saw when I was just a young kid. You know, and this is not something that was so. Going back to the house, we had this. We heard some stories about the previous owners that the son was into Wiccanism and Satan worship, so it might have tied the house or something to it.
I see.
But another thing to keep in mind is my dad was going through a spiritual battle at the time. My mom was going through spiritual battles at the time. And our church was going through spiritual battles at the time. I don't think that spiritual, if you get any kind of view into what's happening spiritually, like what we did, I don't think that it's necessarily associated with a house. Now, there's some stories that go on with this house that it might be, that there might be something to do with the location. I don't know. But I'll explain that later. Just remind me if I forget.
Sure.
But I do believe that when you're going through these battles, that the attitudes that you're seeing, there is a demonic spirit, a demonic force. It's the devil working through these people. You know, I've talked with a lot of people, you know, that have went through like the abuse that you've talked about, and you know, you often. I've listened to your podcast quite a bit, and you often just focused mostly on the conservative holiness movement. But there's other avenues of the holiness movement, and then there's other, you know, conservative groups within the Christian church in America, and they all have very similar issues that we have in the CHM.
They sure do. Yes, they do.
You know, and that is the abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the spiritual abuse. You know, and by talking to people in those other groups, you start learning this is not just our one little group. This is the Christian church in America.
So this makes me think, 'cause different times when I've sat around and talked about this stuff with people, we've always, usually always comes up in the conversation, who in the world would do that? And if I'm following what you're saying that, well, there's something a little extra going on. It's not.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Obviously, anybody in the right mind knows it's not natural, but your persuasion here is that there's definitely something evil that's driving these people.
Well, absolutely. I think once you let yourself go outside of that relationship with Jesus Christ to where you end up just being a cultural Christian. You know, you are Christian by osmosis. You grew up that way. That you are in the position to where you are manipulated by Satan just as much as what you call a sinner. You know, this is when you are not in an actual relationship with Jesus Christ, you're not going to be under the protection of Jesus Christ. You know, so you know, you're sitting there, you are vulnerable to all forms of spiritual warfare and spiritual manipulation, and you will be a tool. So I ended up having the wonderful midlife crisis idea of joining the Army at 34. And yeah, that was something. But when I was going through basic training, I met some amazing people, and for them to share their stories with me, I feel so privileged, you know, just to hear their stories and then be able to hopefully just be a positive influence on their lives and try to not, because we're talking about individuals, two individuals I talked to. One went to a conservative holiness church in Alabama. The pastor sexually molested him. So he wanted nothing to do with church. So when I was in basic training, I did not go to chapel. I had the idea, it's like, I'm not going to go to chapel. I'll do a Bible study on my own. I'll stay back in the barracks, do a Bible study on my own. And if somebody wants to join me, I'll minister with them. We'll have our own little chapel service. If they don't want to join me, that's fine. I'll just do it on my own. Because I wanted basic training to not just help me learn how to overcome all of those hardships that you have to deal with. Like you got, it's mostly mental when you're going through that kind of training. It's not just physical, but
imagine.
it's also it's also spiritual if you let it be. That spiritual aspect can really just uplift you and you get closer to God through all of that hardship. It can be a beautiful experience. And that's what I wanted it to be. And I had these people there noticing I'm reading my Bible, and they started asking questions. Why didn't you go to church? I said, well, you know what? I kind of grew up going to church. That kind of that was a scary thing for me.
Uh-huh.
So I want to really grow. So it's hard for me to grow when I go to church, because for me, a preacher is preaching. I don't really know where he's coming from. And, I studied to be a pastor. So I'm sitting there criticizing everything the preacher's saying instead of really getting something out of the sermon,
Yeah, you kind of got spoiled
it's
on
like,
it.
Exactly, I got spoiled on it. So I'm going to do the Bible study on my own so I can actually get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then they start telling me their stories. They tell me they got molested by their pastor. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Mm.
Can you imagine? It's like I had some bad things happen to me. Some actual spiritual abuse happened to me growing up, because I was the demon child from age 5. This person got sexually molested by their pastor.
I know.
I can't imagine that.
Joel, as much as I disagree with so much that I saw from my church and all that when I was growing up, I thank God that I didn't go through what so many others have told me about that they went through as kids in fundamentalism. Because some of them, man, had it so bad.
It's so prevalent that as I'm sitting there and I'm talking with this individual, and they're telling me how they were molested by their pastor, another guy in my barracks speaks up and he said, I was molested by my Sunday school teacher. And he went to a conservative Christian church. It was a Methodist church. He was molested by his Sunday school teacher. That's how prevalent it is. Two people from completely different parts of the United States randomly sitting in a room because they wanted to serve their country. And boom, they're right there sitting there, met each other over a Bible study.
It's almost terrifying sometimes when you think about how prevalent it is. Like it almost just, it's as much as, I mean, we've been doing this podcast now for almost 2 years, and a good portion of those 2 years have been discussing the CHM. And it's still almost at times hard to believe. Like it doesn't compute. It's like,
well, the thing that I see and I saw at that moment, and the more and more I realized, because I went to God's Bible School and I studied missions and ministry. That was my 2 subjects. And I started realizing the Christian church in America is the biggest mission field out there.
you ain't kidding. And right there is where we're going to stop with Joel Stewart for this episode. I'm going to break this one into 2 parts. Joel has a lot of good stuff that he's already said and that you all will get to hear on the next episode, which should drop in just a few days. I believe we talk a little bit more about the paranormal activity. That's just a generic term that I know to call it. Really, spiritual battle is what I think it should be called. But talk a little bit more about that, some more his views on the CHM and how he thinks that things should be done differently, and so on and so forth. So if you like this, be sure and tune in for the next episode for part 2 with Mr. Joel Stewart. I love y'all. I'll see you on the next go-round.